When Dr. Bradley, our guest speaker tonight, is asked how he ended up working with adolescents, he responds by saying that he might still be one. Like most teens, he never started out to do with his life what he ended up doing. And like most teens, his successful career was the end product of many failures. Born and raised in Philadelphia, he attended Catholic schools, earning his bachelor's degree from LaSalle University while on a military scholarship. His first aborted career was a short-lived adventure as an officer in the U.S. Army. Next, he tried going to law school. At one point, he even tried being a disc jockey. Wow. It is. While he sat in his constitutional law class trying to figure out what the heck to do next, he filled out a job application to work as a part-time counselor with juvenile delinquents, as they used to be called in the mid-'70s. He says he was just looking to make some lunch money, and instead, to his amazement, he finally found his life passion, teenagers. He was powerfully drawn to their honesty, their struggle, and their pain. Teens, Dr. Bradley says, became his heroes, and they remain so to this day. He ended up switching his field of study to psychology, eventually earning his doctorate from Temple University. He holds additional degrees as an addiction specialist and a forensic examiner. He has worked in about every place you will find teenagers: prisons, schools, social service agencies, and in private practice. And he says that his best credential is being the parent of a 23-year-old son and a 17-year-old daughter. After over 25 years of watching the heart-wrenching and heroic journeys of hundreds of adolescents and their families, he wrote the best-selling book, Yes, Your Teen is Crazy, and followed that up with 3 others, Yes, Your Parents Are Crazy, The Heart and Soul of the Next Generation, Extraordinary Stories of Ordinary Teens, and most recently, When Things Get Crazy with Your Teen, The Why, The How, and What to Do Now. These books have received rave reviews and have won a total of 10 national awards. Now, here to speak on drugs and alcohol, tools and tactics for parents of teenagers, please join me in welcoming award-winning psychologist, Dr. Michael Bradley.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you. I am here tonight to try to help you deal with the challenges that I think you've recently been confronted with in your community on drug and alcohol issues. And by the way, from this point forward, I will just be using the word drug and dropping and alcohol, because alcohol is a drug. In fact, it's one of the worst ones out there. So we'll talk about that. From this point forward, when I say drugs, I am including alcohol. And before I get into the seminar itself, a couple of kind of outlines for you. One, we're going to get you out of here by 9 o'clock. Those of you who have babysitters on the clock, I understand. And 2, I'd like to see who you guys are in terms of a couple of things. One, who here has been through a prior lecture of mine? Oh no, I need new jokes. Okay, emergency, okay. I will try to not be repetitive for you guys. And second, can I get an idea of who you are in terms of service stripes in the military, like where you are on the parenting continuum? Can I see a show of hands who here has their eldest child age 25 or over? Okay, got a lot of vets in the crowd. Great, I'll be calling on you for some witnessing. Who here has eldest child 18 to 25? Okay, eldest child 13 to 18? And that really brings them out, doesn't it? Okay. And anybody we didn't get to yet? Younger than 13? Oh my goodness. We got a bunch of newbies here. Should I tell them, or do the vets want to tell them? What do you think? Well, for you newbies, just understand this can be kind of a little trying. And I think one of the biggest things that happens is people who haven't been through this yet have one of 2 reactions, one of which is to say, oh my God, we're all going to die. And the other is to say, that'll never happen with my kid. And both things are not good reactions. If you can, try to go right down the middle, understanding, by the way, your children are in a drug world. Your children are living in a drug culture. That is the fact. How badly this will hurt them is why we're here tonight, to try to limit damage. And for you newbies, we'll touch on this later, be very careful about the loss of innocence thing. The first time our kid does one of these things, whether it be sex or drugs or whatever, a lot of us have this terrible reaction of grief, and we just pull away from them because they're not who we thought they were. It's a good idea to kind of assume your kids are going to be messing with this stuff to some degree, so you're not just blown away when it does happen. You do want to be kind of ready, and that's hopefully something we'll help you with tonight. 35 years ago, believe it or not, I had one of those lightning bolt moments. You ever have a lightning bolt moment? You know, it's kind of a defining life moment. I was recently out of the military, and I did get this job working in you call it a juvenile forensic unit, which is a prison for teenagers. And in the orientation for that job, I was real happy to be home. The presenter said, you should all know that if you're going to work here, the odds of you being seriously injured and or killed are greater than the odds that some of you faced as infantrymen in Vietnam. The violence rates had just exploded in the juvenile forensic prisons. And I thought, oh great, here we go again. Something else to try to survive. I latched on to a guy named Chuck Schrader, who became my mentor and professor at one point, got me to switch majors and such. And Chuck was the psychologist. And we were walking through the halls one Monday morning, and there was a commotion in the day room. A day room is a large room with pool tables and ping pong tables, and kids who are supposed to have earned the privileges to be there are only supposed to be there. But after a weekend, you always have problems because the weekend staff screws things up, and they often put kids in wings that they shouldn't be in with too much freedom. So we hear this commotion, and we look in, and there's a huge kid standing on a pool table, and he's swinging the pool cue, the business end, and he's going to kill anybody that comes near him. And he's scarred, he's a gang kid, and he's ready to die to make a point. Surrounding this kid was all the learning in the world, all the doctorates, all the education was trying to talk him down, and he was hearing none of it. He would just kill anybody that came near. Then they were getting the intervention team ready in the corner. What was the intervention team? That was like a bunch of kids who kind of barely got out of the prison, and we made them guards because they were the biggest and the baddest of the kids in the prison. Because the prison was reacting with what we call fear-based strategies. They decided they were taking no more of this crap, and they got tough. So they had the guards. They're in armor, they've got helmets, they've got all the equipment, everything short of an actual firearm, and they're ready to go. They're going to take this kid down, and somebody's going to get hurt and maybe killed. We've seen it happen a number of times. Just as they're getting ready to make their move, behind us, a voice rings out over the chaos. It says, Ronald, what you doing, boy? Ronald. And we turn around, and there's a woman who was a maintenance staff, janitor, in essence, with her push cart. And she had the eyes of age, I like to say, the wisdom thing. And she walks in and says, Ronald, what are you doing? And Ronald stands like at attention with a pool cue in his hand. She walks past all the education. She walks past all the armaments and the tough guys, and she says, Ronald, what did I tell you about this, son? Give me that pool cue. And he hands her the pool cue. And everybody's stunned. It's absolute silence now from this chaos. She says, I told you about, see those boys in the corner? She points to the intervention team. They're crazy. They live for this stuff. I told you about, give me your hand, Ronald. Step down from there. And this huge gang kid puts his hand in her hand. And he steps down from the pool table, and she escorts him past all the stunned, quieted crowd. We can hear her voice as she goes down the hallway, taking him to the proper wing, saying, I told you what the rules are here, son. You got to get out of here alive, and the way you do it, blah, 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 blah. Chuck turned to me and said, you just witnessed the neurologic power of a respect-based relationship. The neurologic power of a respect-based relationship. And that was like a lightning bolt. Chuck became an expert in this, and ultimately, he developed a model program where he reduced the rates of violence in that prison by 90%. Chuck never, ever talked to a kid. He only talked to the adults surrounding the kids. And he came up with a model that they called respect-based intervention, which is still in use today. So why am I telling you about this? Because when systems get overwhelmed, be they prisons or families, with threats of things like violence and or drugs, they tend to respond in one of really three ways. One is they quit. They just say, there's nothing we can do. Just let it go, hope for the best, ride it out. A second one is to go to fear-based strategies. That's where we use things like punishments, which I'll explain later, versus consequences. That's where we scream and yell, we hit, we break people down, we appeal to the fear center in their brain, the animal brain in the back of the head. And that doesn't work either. What Chuck had demonstrated is that by using a respect-based philosophy, you can instill control without using power. How? By changing up the reactions of the adults to the actions of the kids. And I'm here tonight to try to shape up some of your reactions to what you see going on with the kids, because you have a similar amount of power, and you can make a similar amount of change in kids that are having struggles. I'm going to try to set this up for you in 4 parts. First, we have to chat a little bit about the brain inside your teenager's head, particularly about some changes that are going on that make it uniquely vulnerable to drugs in this culture. Mother Nature, unfortunately, has set up your kid's brain to have absolutely no problem doing drugs, and in fact, to see them as terrific things to do. I'm afraid that part you'll find a little bit scary and kind of get mad with Mother Nature, but in fact, you need to know what's happening inside your kid's head as you make decisions about how you're going to respond to drug issues. Second, we're going to talk a little bit about the world around your kids, because that world is indeed now officially a drug culture. Things have shifted, and shifted dramatically from certainly 50 years ago. A lot of the research that we're doing examines changes over a 50-year period, and as you see, there are stunning differences. But a lot of us are operating on premises based on 50-year-old data. So our responses are really out of date, and we're sort of paying the price for that. Third, we're going to get to the what do you do about this stuff. Going to go over some specific down and dirty strategies. How should you respond? As parents, what sorts of things should you put in place? What are the general guidelines? And then we'll get to the best part of the evening, which is Q&A. Your questions, hopefully my answers. I'm going to try to allow 60 minutes for Q&A. If I'm actually successful at doing that, that will be a world record. Why is that? Because one, I am Irish by birth. And on that note, Q&A in my family stands for quarrels and arguments. So if you want to stand up and say what you're saying makes no sense, it's the dumbest thing I've heard in 30 years, feel free. It makes for a much better evening. Usually it means I'm not speaking clearly, or you know something I don't. And one of the reasons I still do these lectures is everywhere I go, I learn something I didn't know. I'm always looking for that nugget that I need to check out. So feel free to disagree. If you want to call me names, that's fine. I won't be homesick. That's the way they treat me at home. So, feel free. Second, contrary to the myth, there is such a thing as a dumb question. You all know what the dumb question is? It's the one you don't ask. Guys, I guarantee if you've got a question, other folks have the same question, but not all of us are brave enough. So when we get to Q&A, we're going to ask you to raise your hands, and we're going to have the microphones going to do the Oprah thing, circulating in the audience. But please ask those questions, and if we don't get to your particular question tonight, check out our website. We have something there called Forums, and there you'll see lots and lots of situations families are dealing with drugs and alcohol, and you can see how we operationalize responses to particular situations. So feel free to check that out. Point of business. First of all, I beg your pardon, the voice is a little thin, doing a lot of speaking recently, but we will get through the evening. It is actually overuse, not nerves, although I still get nervous. Sarah, my 17-year-old daughter, helped me with the nervous stuff, by the way. She said, as I was preparing for a seminar, she said, Dad, do you still get nervous doing these talks? I said, yeah, sure. She said, you do? You do so many of them. I said, yeah, I always get nervous. It's important, and I don't want to screw up, and, you know, it's like that. She said, wow. She said, I have a tip for you so you won't be nervous, Dad. I said, what's that? She said, just remember one thing. You're only going to be talking to a very big bunch of very bored people. Thank you, Sarah. I feel so much better. So hopefully, Sarah's prediction will not be correct, but I will use the water to ease the voice. So you want to start with the good news or the bad news? I forget what kind of crowd you have out here. Bad news or good news? Nah, I'm going to do the bad news first. It's an Irish thing. We love the bad news. You ever listen to Irish music? Yeah, I was at a festival one time, and the guy said to the singer on stage, how come you guys don't play any happy Irish music? And he said, is there any? We love the tragedy. So in any event, what's the first point of bad news? Teenage brains don't work well. It's something you should do some reading about. They're in the midst of going through a huge change, getting ready to make the leap into adulthood. But as Mother Nature renovates those brains, she made an incredible mistake, not anticipating what's going on in our world today. She starts in the back of the head and works forward. That's where this stuff starts. What's in the back of the head? That's where she builds in very powerful urges, social, emotional needs, boyfriends, girlfriends, sex, affiliation, approval of peers, being in the cool crowd, all that stuff gets really fired up first. Then she kind of looks forward in the renovation part, and what gets done last? The prefrontal cortex. What's the prefrontal? That's the smart part of the brain. Like when you're driving home today and somebody cuts you off on the road, you're going to have a flash. You may not even realize it, but part of you is going to get angry. You're going to want to race up on the guy's tail. You're going to want to throw fingers and scream and yell, maybe race him, cut him off, you know. All this craziness flashes in the animal part of your brain. Hopefully, it then gets sent to the front of your brain, which says that you really want to die over 10 feet of asphalt. He's probably got a gun, you know, let it go. And, okay, and then you do the right thing and let it go. Well, teenagers got the first part in spades. They got all the power and the passion, the emotion. They ain't got the second part. Everybody got that? In early adolescence, they got all the passion, all that stuff, and they don't have the committee to say, hey, is this really a good idea or not? Your job as parents is to become the committee when they're young teens and slowly back off and help them learn how to build the front part of their brain. No small, easy task, but we'll give you some tips on trying to do that. So, what are some of the specific impacts of this stuff? The first thing that hits typically is moods tend to become a little less dependable. Have you noticed that? Veteran parents? Your kid prior was kind of real stable and everything was predictable, and one day, like, all hell breaks loose and what the heck is going on? With boys and girls are different, by the way. There are sexual differences on how they do this. Boys typically kind of just retreat to the room, to the cave for about a year. Girls are a little different. They tend to get more involved in displaying their angst in front of other people, particularly moms. Mothers and daughters, by the way, most powerful relationship on the face of the planet. Watch out. Try not to get too despondent. Young moms with young kids, be very careful because you're kind of bumbling along and things are great. You know, you guys have matching outfits and you go to lunch and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, what you're looking out your front window at your neighbor's house, and she has a 16-year-old daughter, your daughter's 10, and the 16-year-old is shrieking and cursing and hurling lawn ornaments at her mother, and you're tempted to think a thought you shouldn't think. And what's the thought? Yeah, my child would never say that to me, or I'd never let my kid talk to me like that. Don't do that, don't go there. Light a candle if you're religious, you know, say a prayer, whatever, but do not judge. And, you know, until you've walked that walk, it's very different. So be careful about expectations. They can crash painfully. So they're also different in terms of conflict, and it really has to do with the fact that girls are smarter than boys. Girls start these changes about 18 months ahead of the boys in terms of the brain development. And the girls are just much smarter. Boys will typically have explosions, punch holes in the walls, and more times than not, the next day or even a half hour later, I'm sorry, baby. And the next day, they can't even remember what they were angry about. You know, it's just like, I know I'm pissed off at you, but I can't remember what the hell it was. Well, give me a sandwich, I'm going to school. Girls are very different. Girls are great at manipulating adults. And in terms of drug use, they're much better at hiding it. They're really good at concealing, more so than boys. But you can see the level of intelligence in girls when they're angry with you. They get you back in spades. Angelina one time was screaming at her mom because she wanted to go to a beer party at age 13. And mom had this crazy idea that's a bad idea. So she said no, and Angelina didn't punch holes in the walls. She just got icy cold. She got the look. I've seen the look before, by the way. The Al-Qaeda guys, the ISIS guys, they got that look. And she turned to mom and said, "You'll be sorry." And that was it. I was wondering, gee, if I was mom, I'd probably sleep at the Holiday Inn tonight. You know, it's just like, mom came home the next day after work to go to her bedroom to change, opens her closet door to find every one of her left shoes was missing. Not left and right, just the left shoe from every pair of shoes was gone. Now, if you really want to wound a woman, think about it. You know, what sort of things can you do? Yeah, because women usually put a lot of time into their shoes, right? It's like a thing. Guys don't care. They take the least smelly shoe and put it on, you know. But so girls are very good at this. But the more serious side of that is they can cover tracks real well. Girls network well. They set up stories real well about whose house they're at and whether there are drugs there or not. Alcohol's a drug. So you have to be a little bit sharper with the girls. Next, by the way, the moodiness that you're seeing are dopamine crashes. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter in the brain. It does a bunch of things, but it helps us feel okay. Teenagers go on this dopamine roller coaster in early adolescence. They just feel crummy. I mean, they qualify as clinically depressed, except the next day they're fine. And it makes clinicians crazy. We overdiagnose kids. We overmedicate kids. Why? Because they'll present stone on like they're major depressed. And then the next day, they're fine. So it gets tricky, but it's real painful for the kid. Why is that related to drug use? Because drugs can really fill that gap. The drugs that kids are using today, marijuana and alcohol primarily, fill the dopamine gap in a terrible way that we'll talk about later. So it can make it real attractive to kids so they feel better. Next, they become impulsive. They'll say and do things that stun them as much as it stuns you, probably more them. Like Stephen, who was in my office, he came in with a huge leg cast. Well, I was in a leg cast. And parents said, "Tell Dr. Badley why you're in a leg cast." It was a kid I was working with, a really neat kid. I really like him. And he said, "Well, we kind of had a bet, and I thought I could make it from the porch roof to the pool, the swimming pool." He said, "I almost made it." And luckily, he hit the chaise lounge, which broke his fall and also broke his leg, may have saved his life. And then the parents asked him the dumbest question in the world after he did this, which was, "What were you thinking? Why would you do that? What were you thinking?" And Stephen, who's honest, says, said, "Didn't you realize how dangerous it is?" No. What's the point of that? Stephen's not stupid. When I say to Stephen, bear with me on this. How far was it from the porch roof to the pool? Well, I guess it was about 10, 12 feet. Do you think you could make that jump? Well, I thought it was possible. Did you think about what would happen if you missed? Well, not at the time, but now it looks really stupid. Question, Stephen, if I asked you before this whole bet came up, is it dangerous to jump that distance to a concrete swimming pool, what would you have said? I'd say it was crazy. He perfectly illustrated the conundrum of the young teen brain, which is, guys, they get the risks. They value reward more. They get risks. They value reward. So when we lecture them about the risks of drug abuse or whatever, they'll get it, and they'll sign the pledge, and they're very convincing. Oh, I'll never do that, Mom. And you believe them. You can see, this kid's really sincere because they are not lying. They're telling the truth. That's what they feel in the moment. But in the heat of the moment of the party, when the drugs get rolled out, suddenly the need for the reward of kids thinking they're cool, it's like peer acceptance and I'm being all adult and bad and all that, goes sky high. The risks don't connect in their brain because they don't have the front part of the brain to pull it together like you do. You'll weigh it out and you'll say, this is a dumb idea. I'm not doing it. They don't do it. It's bang zoom because they love the reward. Everybody got that? So if you put your time into re-lecturing, you lose them. That's why they just glaze over, and what are they hearing? Wah, wah, wah. They know it. They can tell you all the dangers of drugs better than you can tell them. They get lots of drug education, but it doesn't stop the behavior because of the miswiring in the brain. And we'll talk at the end about what do you do about this stuff. Next, their ability to process emotion gets screwed up, and the key piece is if you stress their brain, it cannot learn. If you stress the teen brain, it cannot learn. How do you stress a brain in a teenager? By hitting them, and by the way, most parents in America smack young teenagers around. So people do it. I'm not asking for a show of hands, but most people will lose it at times and smack their kids. And it's actually approved of, it's sanctioned. It's that fear reaction we talked about, that somehow that's going to make the kid not do drugs by getting tough. You also stress their brains by screaming at them, denigrating them. You're crazy, you're a horrible girl, you're blah, blah, blah. And those things all stress the teen brain. So can crying, by the way. If you break down and hold their hands and I'm so scared, it shuts down their brain. The learning centers all shut down. All they can do is run away or fight you, but they can't learn anything. What you're trying to do is to slowly help them learn, engaging the front part of the brain and being able to connect the front and the back. Mother Nature's going to do it on her own, but you can stimulate that process with some techniques we're going to talk about in a minute. The process only occurs if their brain is in neutral. Then they can start to connect these things. They can start to actually do something we call learning. Not just knowing facts about drug use, but learning about themselves, their own behavior, impulse control, social emotional needs, real learning stuff. Only happens when that brain is calmed out. Next, they're all sleep deprived. We talked about that before. They're getting roughly half the sleep, 60%, maybe 70%, of what they need. Sleep exhaustion, what does that do? Depletes dopamine levels. It depresses kids. Ever cut your sleep in half for a few months? How did that work out for you? How were you feeling? And again, drugs can look real appealing to a sleep-deprived kid. By the way, here's the problem with the drugs that a lot of us permit our kids to do. Marijuana and alcohol, actually virtually all of them do this, but the two biggies, weed and alcohol, put kids on a dopamine roller coaster. It works like this. When they're feeling crummy, if they start drinking, they get this boost of dopamine. You feel better when you start drinking? Yeah, me too. How about weed? Same thing. The explosion of dopamine goes sky high. They feel great. And then it starts to slowly wear off. But when they started out at this level, their baseline, when they come down, they don't come down to their baseline. They come down a little bit below, just a little bit. They feel crashed out, hungover, burnt out. What does it make them do? Think about, hey, I felt good when I was smoking, drinking. Let's do it again. So they do it again. And again, they get that rush, but not quite the same rush. Never the same as the first drink. not quite the same. And when they come down a little bit lower than the first usage. What do you have? A descending roller coaster. Everybody got that? Alcohol and marijuana are biochemical depressants. Biochemical depressants over time. They overload the brain's ability to produce its own dopamine. The brain, in these avalanches of dopamine, shuts off, it closes down the mechanisms to utilize dopamine because it can't handle it all. So that's how drug users slowly become depressed. They say depression is the hallmark of drug use. The argument is, what's the chicken and what's the egg? Which came first? I don't know. But it sure as hell is there. Talk to an addict, they're depressed. Their brain can't feel the joy your brain can feel if the rain ever goes away. You go out tomorrow, it's a beautiful day. It's like, oh, God, it's a beautiful day. They don't get that. The brain can't understand beauty and joy, achievement, and then get a payoff from those things. It just becomes all about the drugs. And when does that impairment start? The first use. The first use. Particularly teenage brains, as we'll talk about, are particularly vulnerable to this. Okay, second point of bad news. I got to do all this in 20 minutes. Oh my God. Okay. The world around our kids is a drug world. They are surrounded by prompts, suggestions to do drugs. Where are those suggestions? Have you listened to the music about breaking in and emptying out the hotel bar room? What do they call that thing? The hotel room bar or whatever. Yeah, it's my daughter's got that song on all the time. Let's get drunk and tear down the walls and all that stuff. That's a prompt. The lyrics are prompts. The videos are prompts. The Facebook postings. Have you gone through Facebook? You've seen all the kids that get trashed and they take pictures of themselves, completely drunk, passed out. Oh, it's so cool. These are all prompts. Also prompts, one I just got on the way here today is a teacher who was bragging about how drunk and hungover he was in class today. Yeah, cool teacher. Everybody thinks he's just so cool. And he was, yeah, I really got drunk. That was really funny, blah, blah, blah. Oh, my God. Thank you very much. And a couple of other prompts. Parents who either passively condone this behavior, because, oh, what are you going to do? Boys will be boys. And worse, parents that provide the means to do the behavior, to enable it. And when we talk about those statistics, I think you'll be stunned. These are all very powerful prompts that are telling your kid, this is okay, this is normal, this is cool, this is adult. What has it done? Well, it's really affected drug use in 3 ways. And by the way, be very careful about the good news numbers. We have a lot of questions about the good news numbers. For example, there was a big, oh, we're winning the war on alcohol. There's a nationally, I know you guys have a particularly terrible problem here, although I think your numbers are more reliable than some of the other numbers I've seen. But alcohol ticked down about 3 points in the last major nationwide survey. Kids are drinking a little bit less, 3 percentage points. Yeah, but if you flip through the literature, you find out weed use is up 12%, heavy weed use versus heavy alcohol use. What are you looking at? A drug culture. And they swap off. They go from one to the other to the other. But drug use exploded over the past 5 decades. It essentially is staying here. Sometimes it bounces up, sometimes it comes down a little bit, but it's not really trending down, regardless of the numbers that you hear. Some of the research is under fire, where somebody was saying, oh yeah, our literature says kids are doing far fewer drugs. Well, if that's true, then explain that in the same time period, over 10 years, the number of overdoses recorded in the hospital literature went up 30%. So, and not to get too brutal, a lot of these are fatalities. So what are you going to believe, the self-report things where we ask kids, hey, would you mind telling me you're doing sex and drugs or body bags? You know, which is the more reliable data? We have a problem with data collection systems. Kids, by the way, are now getting kind of hinky about filling out these forms because not much is secret anymore. And they're worried that this is actually kind of a conspiracy to find out which kid is actually doing drugs. Just make the assumption your kid is in a drug culture. The The three things that we've seen that this has done is, one, the numbers. The second is the concentration of the behavior has increased. Back in the day when I was a gangster teenager, our drinking, if we were lucky enough to get a couple of beers, was a couple of beers in the park. Nobody had any money, and the parents who had the beer were like counting each bottle of beer. So if we could somehow get a hold of a couple of bottles, that was it. If somebody said, did you drink last weekend, we'd say yes. If you ask a kid today, did you drink last weekend, it typically means they binge drank, which is 6 or more shots in a row. 30% of your kids, our kids, binge drank in the past 30 days. They drink to get drunk. They have tremendous access to alcohol. They're not sipping a couple of beers with a hoagie in the park. They're running shots in different ways. So the concentration has gone up. And the third thing is age of onset has gone down substantially. What you may have been confronted with at 16, 17, your kids are dealing with it 12, 13, 14. Why is that important? Well, because the most important statistic you can leave here tonight with is age of onset. If a kid starts drinking at age 14 or using any drug at age 14, they have a 500% increased risk of addiction over a kid who waits until their age of majority, 21 or older. 500% increased risk of addiction. Why? We think it's because that brain is so soft and so easily imprinted upon that if you hit it, if you whack it with these substances, you are really changing the wiring in the brain. You are creating the wiring for addiction. And by the way, 10% of kids today who start drinking will become full-blown addicts. Full-blown addicts in today's world. Which drug would you say is the most dangerous drug out there? Alcohol. Alcohol is the deadly drug, guys. We used to say marijuana was a gateway drug. You're all familiar with the gateway term. You start doing this drug, you go on to the next. Why is it a gateway? Descending roller coaster. As you're using one drug, it stops working. Soon people are using just to try to function, to roll out of bed in the morning. And that's when they say, well, what else is there? And they go on to the next one. Often opiates, pain pills if they can get them, more likely heroin, because it's cheap and plentiful now. And then they get that huge rush again. And then they usually start snorting the heroin or swallowing the pills. That stops working. What's next? Injecting it. And then they get the rush, and then soon they're just living to try to function with heroin. It's a hell. It's an awful, awful situation. Where are they getting all of the alcohol from? Us. And AMA did a survey to ask kids, where are you getting all this stuff from? A third of the kids in America said they were provided the booze by parents, either their own parents or the parents of a good friend who set up the kegs. I'm a forensic examiner. One of my jobs at home, when we lose a kid, I'm on part of a team. We go in if the parents are willing. We get the hard drive, try to find out how we lost this kid, the computer drive, and then how do we not lose the next kid? We interview everybody around the kid. Almost always, majority of the times, drugs are involved when we lose a kid. And now we found that most of the time, these fatalities are related to parents that provided or allowed the use of the drug. They either quit, so what are you going to do? Kids are going to drink, leave them alone. Or they actually went a step further. I interviewed one parent where we lost a kid and said, do you mind if I ask you, I understand you admitted to setting up the beer kegs. Yeah, I did. Could I ask why you're doing that? He said, I wanted them to learn how to drink. I wanted them to learn how to drink. So I'd set up these kegs on Friday nights, and he would warn the kids, don't tell your parents, because they can be hung up on. I'm a cool parent, I understand. And the second reason was I didn't want them doing drugs. Now, this poor guy was involved in a fatality, so I shut up. But inside, I'm screaming, really? You didn't want them doing drugs, so you handed them drugs? Oh, my God. And if you think this is some schlub from the inner city, this is, 4-car garage and extremely wealthy and, the whole 9 yards, entitled communities. Typically, we're seeing worse issues these days. So, what about marijuana? A couple of myths about marijuana, and some answers that may help you. First of all, and here's where we get into the fights, and I know there's a lot of weed warriors probably here tonight, understand that I'm only talking about marijuana and adolescents. I really don't know much about marijuana and adult brains. I know a lot about marijuana and teen brains. And the bottom line is, I know of zero legitimate researchers, scientists, who say teens can use weed. Just like we have zero scientists who say teens can drink alcohol. When we ask them, well, how much is okay? You know what their answer is? Zero. Zero is okay. You can't have any other line. Why not? Well, in the teen brain, if you tell a kid, oh, you can have a beer, you just tell them that 4 is okay. And if you allow 4, you just told them 16 is okay. You can't open the barn door. You have to draw a line somewhere. Where are you going to draw it? 2.5? How are you going to enforce that? And what message did you give your kid? Oh, just don't tell your parents, have a couple beers, give me the car keys, it's okay. Oh my God. You just set up the whole paradigm in the kid's head. This is approved by an authority figure, a parent. Good parent, makes a good living, takes care of his kids, providing teenagers drugs. The impact, the neuroaddictive impact of alcohol is the same in a teen brain as in a pregnant woman. How much can a pregnant woman drink? What's the doctor say? 0. Alcohol is a really pernicious drug. It's dangerous. A little bit can have tremendous impact on fragile brains like developing fetuses and developing teenage brains. And by the way, at 13, the brain is going through a very similar process as a fetus in the last month of gestation. Very similar in terms of the wiring that's going on. Very sophisticated, very vulnerable sorts of things going on in that teen brain. So 0 is okay. What about with marijuana? What does your kids say? It's natural. It can't hurt you. It's natural. God, this kid last week, God put marijuana on the planet to stop wars. So really, interesting. Said, so it can't hurt you, right? And by the way, when I tell these stories, think about how I interact with a kid. I'm always asking them questions. So it can't hurt you, right? Yeah, it can't hurt you. It's natural. Really? So something that's natural can't hurt you? Yeah, because it's not like a drug company made it. So really, what about death caps? He said, what are death caps? I said, Google it. What's a death cap? Anybody know what that is? World's most poisonous mushroom. Yeah, they're purely natural. It's out there. God put it on the planet for some reason. You know, go ahead, swallow a few. You'll be dead in 15 minutes or something. So use those kind of questions and responses, not how could you be so stupid or what's wrong with you, but have your research. Google this stuff and have a response ready. So what about death caps? You have to knock out the mythology. What's the other mythological point? Oh, that it doesn't cause brain damage. And that's because of a study that went out over the wires that said, great news, brain scans prove marijuana use does not cause brain damage in adolescents. Brain scans proved there's no brain damage with marijuana. Well, that's kind of looking for electrons with a hand magnifier. The scale is way out of whack. You can't pick up the subtleties of neurologic damage, movement, with a brain scan. Do you all get what I'm sort of saying? You're looking for something so tiny and so minute, and you don't have the equipment to see it. We now have hard science, and in fact, it does damage brains. 2 things you can punch up, because one of the strategies I'm going to suggest for you later when you're talking to your kid is an exchange of information. When your kid says there's no problem with weed, say, great, I'm glad you came to me and told me that. By the way, do say that. Don't jump down their throat. Don't do that first response. So you say, great, you get some research together that says weed is okay for teenagers, and I'll get some research together that I think says weed is not so good for teenagers, and we'll go to Starbucks and we'll take a look at each other's data. What do you say? Kids think it's kind of cool. It's like, all right, we're going to have a debate now. I'm an adult. So he'll bring his research. The only legitimate stuff will be about adults and marijuana, which is like use of alcohol, same thing. But you say, gee, what does it say about adolescents using weed? Well, I don't know. I didn't see any of that. Well, why don't we go back and research some more? You want to go after their belief system, in addition to having firm fences around their behavior. This is the key balance point. And I'll elaborate on that in a minute. So look at the research. You get smart and look at it. One piece you want to look at is called the New Zealand study. And they found, it was kind of a landmark study, kids who smoked 4 times a week as teenagers suffered a 10% permanent loss of IQ. And it appears to be permanent because even after they stopped smoking as young adults, the IQ never came back online. 10% IQ drop, guys, is like traumatic brain injury. That's huge. You have to be doing something huge to pull that off. Second, Stacy Gruber at Harvard did something, you might as well laugh in the midst of the tragedy, I call the Cheech and Chong experiment. She found that people who used a lot of weed as teenagers, as adults, suffered cognitive impairments where they would repeat the same mistake over and over on intelligence tests. So you would take the test and you say, oh, that's not the right answer, so you try to come at it another way. They would repeat the same approach over and over. Anybody heard Tommy Chong from Cheech and Chong? I actually went to hear, he's a huge weed warrior and he's been very instrumental in legalizing marijuana. He is burnt. I went prepared to argue with the guy. He's toast. Seriously, he's gone. He's become his own character. They tell me he used to be really sharp back in the day. He was really bright and funny and like that. He has become his own caricature. And he was repeating himself over and over. He couldn't even remember what he was saying. It was like early onset dementia stuff, but it was weed-based. He was toast. So check out those studies and have them in your pocket when you're going to talk to your kid about some of the data. A couple of other things you should know about. In the same time period, we talk about the past 5 decades where we've had this explosion and then maintenance of high drug use. A couple of other stunning numbers. One, mental illnesses have exploded among teenagers. Anxiety and depression is up 500% from when I was a teenager. And those are reliable numbers. If we have time, we'll come back. I'll tell you how they found that. But somebody found archived data that does correlate with the same tests we do today. It's not because we see it or we're looking for it, or we're more sensitized to it. It's just, I can't explain it without getting into a lot of detail. Take my word for it. Hard data that tell us, yes, kids are much more anxious and depressed than they were 50 years ago. And another number that shows how much they are suffering as it correlates with the drug use. You can chicken and egg it, but it certainly correlates, is suicide. When we first started to collect suicide data in 1952 reliably, about 78, since 1952 to 2 years ago, suicide among the general population increased 78%, which alone is like, wow, what's going on? Among teenagers in the same time frame, suicide is up 400 to 500%. Suicide. That they feel so awful, they actually want to end their lives. These are stunning numbers, guys. These are, you talk about Ebola, forget Ebola. We've already got plagues. The kids are dying, they're suffering. We give them very powerful medications. We don't even know if we should be giving teenagers these medications because we're trying to keep them alive and off of drugs. Because a lot of the damage, I believe, comes from illegal drugs that they're using. The correlation is sort of irresistible. Couple of other things you need to know. One, over 50 years, they feel less control over their lives than you do. Teenagers today feel they don't have control over the outcome of their lives. Back in the day, most of us did. And I can remember that, saying, oh, if I work hard, go to college, things will work out. Today, kids are fatalistic, almost nihilistic. I can't control what's going to happen. Why is that important? Because if they do feel they have no control, then what the hell? Why not do drugs, have a party, leave a good-looking corpse kind of thing. that's a frightening research finding in terms of changes. The second one, their goals are now materialistic and extrinsic. 50 years ago, most people would identify their goal as a teenager to develop significance in life, to do something important, to make a change in the world. They would talk about developing their values, having a philosophy of life. These are the things they would pick on these multiple choice tests. The same test 50 years later, kids would pick making a lot of money, having a cool car, having a big house, having lots of women. That's what we see in these tests. It's all become extrinsic and materialistic and short-term gratification based. Everybody got that? Huge shifts in the way teenagers see themselves and the world in which they live, which also makes them more prone to using drugs. And finally, they're less resilient. They don't handle failure well. Why? We don't allow them to fail. They get an F at school, and the parents rush in to argue the grade. They get suspended for carrying weed in their pocket, and the lawyers get involved. Parents lawyer up. We don't let the kid handle these things. It turns out failure in the proper dose, when the parent steps back and says, I don't know what the hell to tell you to do. You got a problem. You got to figure it out, is very strengthening. Very strengthening. But they're not resilient. And it's also something else that makes drugs seem attractive, because when they do bomb the SAT, or they don't get into Brown, God forbid, they're not getting into the college they think is going to make their life, which it doesn't, by the way, another seminar we should do. But they're completely burnt, and they run for the drugs because they can't tolerate the feeling of failure, because they don't know what it is to fail and then pull yourself together and get back in the game, because we don't let them do that. Okay. I am talking too much, and I'm going to have to push on a little bit. So, what do you do about this stuff? Don't quit. Also, don't go to the other natural reaction, which is fear. And that's where people mobilize. It's a great American response. We're going to send in the Marines. We're going to kick the hell out of somebody, so people get crazy by using fear-based tactics with kids. The screaming, the yelling, the punishments, the denigration, all that stuff. It doesn't work, but it's well motivated. And dads, we're the guilty ones. I talk to dads all the time, and they'll say, you know, what's wrong with smacking your kid around? I'm going to be truthful with you, Bradley. I smack my kid around. My dad smacked me around, and, you know, I'm a good guy. I work hard. You know, I pay my taxes, and I take care of my family. So what's the problem with smacking kids around? My father smacked me, my drill sergeant. In fact, I just had a father tell me his father was a firefighter, tough old Irish Catholic firefighter. And he said, me and my brothers, when we were at the dinner table, if we had our arms on the table, you know, eating like this, he would stab us in the arm with a fork. I mean, stab, fork, penetrating the arm. And he was telling me this was a good parenting thing. My dad was tough, and that's why we turned out okay. So I say to the dad, this dad, tell me about your father. Tell me more about him. And he said, well, he was a firefighter. He got 2 medals for saving people from burning buildings. He coached everything. He took care of the widow's family down the street. Never had a decent pair of pants in his life. You know, he was an amazing guy. I said, thank you. What a wonderful story. Sir, you just told me about the man's values and character. You never mentioned the arm stabbing. You overlooked the abuse. You forgave the hitting because you admired the man. Everybody got this? It's all about values and character. Your primary focus when you're dealing with a kid in a drug culture is look to the character, look to the values, look to resiliency. You want to put your focus there in addition to having a good set of safety strategies like, no, you can't go to the park and drink beer. But that's not enough. It's not enough to just use fear-based responses. So that's where you look to community service, real community service, not picking up trash on the side of the road. I mean, doing the real deal. Go into the city, work in the homeless shelter, work the soup kitchen, take the summer trip, you know, down to South America. Do real stuff. Get out of Disney World. We live in Disney World. We're disabling our children by letting them live in Disney World. Let them see it's not the way it works. It's not all about me. It's a huge world out there with lots of problems, lots of pain. You can do real stuff, even as a 14-year-old. There's great trips. There's an organization, you don't have to be religious, called Pastors for Peace, and they sponsor these trips. My son went on one of them. It was transformative. I had to get him out of Disney World. It was amazing. He came back a changed young man. So look to those sorts of things to build that character, the values, the resilience, and then drugs look stupid. People who have those things, who are intrinsically motivated, feel good about their lives, drugs are like, why would you do that? What a waste of time. Boy, that's stupid. You can use your time doing much better things. So you want to not overreact, dads, and just drop the hammer. You have to have the balance of approaches. Did I mention something about good news? What's the good news? Time is on your side. In the military metaphor, we talk about a holding action. What's a holding action? That's where you like hold on until help gets there. It's like, oh my God, we got to hang in here, let's try to get through this. Holding action. You're trying to play for time because every day that passes and your kid is not advancing down this continuum of drug use, they're getting smarter. They're getting smarter. By the way, another hallmark of marijuana and alcohol is with kids, they get shut down. When I get them at age 25, they ain't 25. If they're drug cases, they're 14. They really are. And then when they get sober, if we get them to stop using, then they start growing again. After about a year, 6 months to a year, now they're back on the developmental clock. 14, 15, 16, slowly, slowly, slowly. It's the most amazing thing. It paralyzes kids. It shuts them down. Well, I have buddies, some of which aren't alive anymore, and they were just 14 the rest of their lives. They never stopped the heavy drinking. So play for time. Don't get despondent, because every day you get through, it's another brick in the wall. That brain's getting smarter and smarter. Veteran parents, you've seen it. It's like it turns around at some point. Suddenly they make sense. Suddenly they're thinking better, and you're playing for that day. Second, good news. Guess what the greatest influence is when it comes to drug issues with a teenager? What would you say the most powerful factor in their world is? The music, videos, parents, really? Absolutely. Hold on to your beliefs. Parents. Do you believe it? Some nights I do, some nights I don't, but I have to read the research. When I don't, I go back. Yes. Parents, absolutely, far and away, have the most impact on a kid. There's a book out there, great author, I couldn't disagree more, saying that it's the peers, the second family stuff. I don't see it. It's not in the research. It's the parents beyond all else. Peers are huge. The culture is huge. The parents hold the aces. But guys, a lot of us quit, or we get stupid. We don't fight smart. You can't do that because you have the key to what's going to happen to your child. So think about that power. Do not fear conflict. When you tell your kid, no, you can't go drinking in the park with all the cool kids are going, I get that, and you'll be thrown out of the cool crowd, and you say, no, you can't go, I'm sorry. Before you do that, by the way, ask her, why do you think it's okay for a 13-year-old to drink beer? Get your enemy's intelligence. Get her to spill out whatever it is she thinks, because now you know how to shoot back. If she says, beer doesn't hurt anybody, ding, go Google impact of beer on adolescent brain. So you're gaining intelligence. But ultimately you say, well, listen to your arguments. The answer is no, sorry. Does your daughter, do you expect her to say, oh, thank you, mother dearest. How did I ever get so lucky to have such a wise and wonderful mother? No! She's going to scream and yell and bang the door. I hate you forever, and you'll never see my children. They're ruining my life. That's what she's going to do. And you're supposed to say, sorry, what would you like for dinner? I hate you, you're a horrible person. Yeah, I know, sorry. That's what your brother said too. So what do you think? Should we do the salmon tonight? You're like the dispassionate cop, as we say. You sidestep that stuff. Don't have an expectation of a payoff. When they become teenagers, they don't give you anything anymore. When they're young, they give you lots of stuff. They give you hugs, they think you're smart, they think you're funny. You're going to lose it all, so just kind of not have the expectation for having that. Do not fear the conflict. Guys, conflict in the proper dose and the proper tone feels like love to the child. If you don't believe me, go on my website, get newsletter. I sent it out just before last holiday season, before Christmas. Sent everybody on the list a holiday gift. It was a letter from a mother. I'm not even going to tell you. You just have to read it. What's another case in point about not fearing the conflict? Remember Angelina, the sweetheart who took every one of her mother's pairs of shoes? Remember her? She ultimately said to me, after some work, she said, you know, that was really, I'll say crummy, she used a different word, that was really crummy of me to have done that to my mom. She said, but you know, I really hate my mom. I really do hate her. I really hate her because she loves me so much. Everybody got that? I stopped and wrote it down very carefully. I really hate her because she loves me so much. So part of your job as a parent is to get all that crap thrown at you for doing the right thing. Do not argue. Do not plead. Don't you understand? I'm doing what's best for you. None of that. Just lay the decision on. Sorry, what would you like for dinner? Everybody got the drill? It's called dispassionate cop. Second rule, with dispassionate cop approach, use consequences, not punishments. People say, what do you do the first time your kid comes in and obviously we're drinking? First of all, be very careful about thinking they just had a few beers. One of the latest rages is they steal their little brother's ADHD medications, Ritalin, Concerta, and so forth. They take that so they can drink more shots so they look macho. By the way, girls are now macho. Girls are now running shots to look macho. Things have changed, right? So be very careful. If you have any suspicions at all, take them to the emergency room. You're probably wasting your time. You may be saving their life. Every year, about 5,000 of these teenagers do not wake up in the morning because they either were drinking so much that when the stimulant wore off, then they stopped breathing, or they vomit when they're asleep and they inhale their vomit. You can gag to death on vomit, and or they get a pernicious form of pneumonia, which is really tough to cure. So be very careful about saying, oh, they just had a few drinks. Play it cautiously. What do? Find them guilty, say we'll talk in the morning. Do not parent at 2 a.m. So you'll be much smarter the next morning than you will be at 2 a.m. Collect your thoughts. This is Special Forces time. You know, we're not doing carpet bombing. It has to be a precision sort of a thing, well thought out. So what do? The next day she comes down to the table. She's waiting to get grounded. You're going to issue a punishment? What does that do? Sidebars the whole thing. Now you're going to ground her or take away her phone or whatever. You just told her the price for getting drunk is I lose my phone for a period of time. I can't go out for a period of time. You just missed the golden opportunity. You're not teaching a thing. She'll get all pissed off. You're going to fight about grounding. You're going to break down, let her go out, and she's headed for the next round. Pivot. When she sits down, you say to her, tell me what you learned. She say, what? Tell me what you learned. You might hit gold. You might have a kid who's so stunned because she's off balance now to say, well, it was actually stupid, Mom. The stuff tastes awful, and people were crazy. Johnny, was attacking Susan. We had to pull him off of her. People were puking, and it tasted. I don't get it, Mom. It's really stupid. She learned. She figured something out. She'll say, what's my punishment? So I'm not big on punishments. I'll tell you what. How about if we do some reading? You're going to punch up some literature. Maybe you do some research about what alcohol is, deadly drug for teenagers. So how about if we do that? That's it? I'm not grounded or anything? No, I'm not into punishment, sweetie. Oh, great. Oh, one other thing. Sweetheart, what do we do if it happens again? Never happen again, Mom. I love hearing that. But honey, what do we do if it does happen again? I don't know, I guess you should ground me. Yeah, I think groundings, and that's kind of stupid. I'll tell you what, if it happens again, can we agree that you are not ready for the level of freedom of going to these sleepovers, which is where it always happens, by the way, sleepovers at your trusted parents' house. Can't tell you how many times in a month I hear this one. We were stunned that they were letting them drink. Yeah, can we agree you're just not ready? You're not a bad kid, you're a great kid, and you're smart, and I know you're going to get it, but you're just not ready. It's like driving a car. You know, if you take the test and you don't do well, you're not a bad person, you're just not wired yet to drive. So can we agree you can't go do the sleepovers because you're not ready to make those decisions, like getting out of there, which should be the rule. No, you don't teach them how to stay where everybody's getting drunk. You don't do that. They have to leave. They can't be witness to an illegal event. We'll talk about that later. So you're telling the girl, you're a great kid, just not wired for this level of freedom. She says, you mean I can't have sleepovers? I say, well, of course you can. You can bring your friends here. I'm not trying to hurt you with a punishment. I'm trying to keep you safe with a consequence. And we'll try it again. You know, if you're doing well, 3 months from now, I'll try another away sleepover and we'll see how you do. She says, and you say, bring your friends here. I'll get the pizzas. Have your sleepover here. But my friends won't come here. Gee, sweetheart, why is that? Yeah, exactly. So you're not trying to hurt. You hurt somebody for being hurtful, you make them angry, and they want to hurt back. That's what prison does. You're pivoting. Punishment, you take power out of the person's hands. Too late, you screwed up, I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to take stuff you love. Consequence is, if it happens again, this happens. What have we just done? You put the power in your kid's hand, not your hands. Sweetie, I'm on your side. Here you go. You write it out. I'm rooting for you. Good luck. So when she screws up and it happens again, you don't yell and scream. You just say, okay, nothing personal, sweetie. You're just not ready to be out there, and that's okay. You'll get it one day, but we're not doing away sleepovers or hanging in a park or whatever it was. You all got the drift of that? Go to consequences when you're calm, not punishments when you're in pain and you want to hurt her because she made you scared and sad. So do like the judge. I know you're guilty. Come back. I'll give you the sentence tomorrow. And then think. How do I teach and control that balance of going after their belief system? Guys, if you change a belief, you change a person. If you change a belief, you change a person. Change a person, you start to change a culture. And that's our salvation. If enough parents start to do this, you can start a tidal wave going in the opposite direction. I've seen it in communities where they've lost kids tragically. And the parents stood up and said, we're not doing this anymore. This is stupid. And the parents started this. In my book, I talk about one thing that I witnessed where the parents got the kids together and the parents formed a circle around the kids. Because the kids were taking turns going to the houses in the afternoon after school, which is the other deadly time, and stealing booze. You know, every afternoon they were getting lit at somebody's house. And the parents discovered this, called each other, held hands, circled around the kids and said, we're not doing this anymore. We love you too much. Key words. You bookend this stuff with love. Sweetie, I love you. This can kill you. It can't happen. Sorry. I love you. I love you too much to let you do something that could hurt you terribly. You all got the drill? You put anger into that equation. Nobody's thinking about love, about belief systems, about dangerous drugs. It becomes a football game. Who's tougher? Who's badder? So think before you respond.